everyone, welcome back to the REST API in-depth series. In this video, we're going to go over a bunch of exercises together to get more practice with put and patch requests together when it comes to REST API, specifically in Deno. So in the previous videos, we looked at put and patch requests, how this kind of compared to things like the post request previously, which was to create new resources, as well as a get request before that, which was to get resources. Put and patch was a way for us to replace and modify or update different resources respectively. And we looked at a few examples of kind of when you would use each one. So this is just a bunch more exercises. We have a warm-up, 3 different exercises, as well as a kind of a little extra bonus on there to get more practice with these ideas. So let's just get right to the exercises together. Okay, so to start, I have these files here in my VS Code open already. These are available on the GitHub repo for this series. You can grab that in the description below, or you can just follow along with the video. I do have a file here, which I'll mention shortly, which we'll actually be using. So you can probably create that file yourself with your own data, or you can just grab the one in the repo as well and just copy and paste it or pull it down using Git. Now, let's start with this warm-up exercise. I'd like you to create a new Deno project or workspace if you haven't already. I want you to respond to any put request with a 200 status code, regardless of any route. So no URL pattern routing here. Same with a patch request with a 200 as well. So all other types of requests, so like get, post, delete, any other types of requests, make sure you respond with a 404. Then in Insomnia, or your REST API client, I'd like you to add a JSON body to the put or patch request, and then actually log out the contents of that JSON body on the server side in Deno in the console, so you can make sure you're actually reading that correctly. Then I'd like you to go ahead and test that all in Insomnia. Make sure you're kind of getting anything logged out, all the 200s, all the 404s, and that's all working correctly. And then I'll set you up nicely for the 3 exercises that we have. So give that a shot, and then we'll go through it together. Okay, so to start, I'll just create a new file over here. I'll just call this warmup.ts. I do need to create a new Deno workspace here, so I can do Control-Shift-P or Command-Shift-P here. I'll do Deno enable. Then I'll just create this VS Code settings JSON file with Deno settings in there. Now I can actually go ahead and type in this my handler. So I'll do async function handler. This is going to be a request of type request. It is going to return a new response. And for now, I'll just handle that 404 case. So I'll just send an empty body back with a status of 404. And I will do deno.serve, and I will serve up that handler on the default port here of 8000 on localhost. So I'll go ahead and open up my terminal here. I'll do Deno run --watch --allow-net, since this is going to be networking. There's no read and write access here for the files that we need, so that should be fine. And then this is going to be the warmup.ts. Now I have that running. If I switch over to Insomnia, let me just copy and paste that real quick. HTTP localhost 8000, go to Insomnia. I'll do a plus here, a new HTTP request, and I'll make sure to switch this to a put request, and I'll paste that in HTTP localhost 8000. And if I send that off, I do get back my 404 not found. So that's pretty nice. I'll go over to my body here. I'll make sure I choose a JSON body. I'll just put something in here. For example, I'll just put hello. And this is going to be world. It doesn't really matter what you put in here, as long as you have some kind of body in the JSON here that we can actually take a look at on the back end. And that should get back the 404 still, because we didn't do anything really differently on the back end to handle this request. Now, if I switch back to VS Code, let's handle these 2 cases that we mentioned here, which was the put and patch responding with the 200s, depending on kind of which route it is. They're both responding 200s here, so we could probably handle both of them the same way. Let me just close off this terminal here. I'll say if the request.method is equal to put, then this is going to, I'll just do console.log, and I'll just do put, just so we can see that there's a difference. And then I'll return a new response, and this is going to be a null response with a status of 200. And I'll do the same for a patch. So I'll just copy that and I'll paste it here just to save some time. And I'll change both of these to be patch. And that's also going to respond with a 200. Now we do want to log out the body of the actual JSON in this case that's coming in the body of the request. So let's grab that really quick. So I'll say console.log of the, actually, you know what, let me just put this in here. I'll do put and then I'll say also await of the request dot, let's do JSON. Yeah, why not? Just because we know it is JSON. So this is going to turn, it is a promise, so that's why we're awaiting it. Whatever is going to be coming out of that body is going to turn into text, and JSON parse it for us. So that's going to be there, and that's going to be the same for this as here. I'll just copy that really quick, and I'll just paste it for the patch, just so we can see that work. Now, if I open up my terminal here after saving the file, let's try that one more time. If I send this off as a put request, we get back our 200 okay. If I go back to VS Code, we see my put request here for hello and world, which is nice. And I'll switch back to Insomnia. I'll change this to a patch request instead of a put, send that off. Really the only difference here, it's still getting 200, but the main difference is just that console log will be slightly different in this case. You can see that's a patch for hello world. Perfect. So there you have it. Nice quick one. Hopefully you had a bit of practice there to get your fingers warmed up. Let's take a look at exercise 1 next together. Just close this terminal off, go over to exercise 1, and I'll read this out for us. So same thing, create a Deno workspace. For this exercise and the next few exercises, actually, we're going to be using the users.json file. So you can find this in the repo, again, in the description below, or you can just create really your own users.json file. There's only a few things really in here. Let me just open it up real quick. You can see it's an array of users. In this case, I only have 5 users in here. I just generated this from an online tool that helps generate mock JSON data. And each user, there's 5 in this case, has an ID, which is a number, a name, which is a string, and an email, which is a string as well. So really, you could just create a couple. You don't have to have 5. I just want to have like some realistic kind of looking data in here. Yeah, you could probably just have a couple to do this test if you don't want to go and grab that file. So that's what we're going to be using for these exercises. So for the first exercise, we want to use this file. And you're going to have to make sure to do the read and write privileges for Deno as well, so you can actually start using that content in this exercise. Now, the core of this exercise for the first one is to create a route for this kind of path right here, /user/ and then a dynamic ID, so like user1 or user2. And we're going to be using it for any of the users in this file. So recall that this file that I have right here only has 5 users. From 1 through 5. So you want to make sure you're using one of those unless you're creating your own file. Now we're going to use Insomnia to create a put request with a JSON body for a new user with an existing ID, so like one of those 1 through 5 from this file, as well as an updated name and email for that user. So recall when we're doing a put request, we're basically replacing a resource. In this case, we're replacing a user with an existing ID with new information, but the ID should be the same. So in this case, we're going to replace like user ID 1 or something with a new email and a new name. Then on Deno's side, you're going to accept this request and you're going to save that new user to the user.json file to kind of replace that existing user that was there before, and respond with the updated user information as well as a 200 to let the client know that that was successful. And then you can test this in Insomnia, maybe try it with a couple of users, different IDs, just to make sure it's actually kind of your logic for looping through that array and grabbing the correct user is working correctly. And you're also checking the actual file to make sure it's being committed to that file and saved correctly. So give that a shot. Remember, put complete replacement of a particular resource within that kind of collection of resources. Give that a shot yourself, then we'll go through it together. Okay, so I'll create a new file here. I'll just do ex1.ts. And in here, we'll do the same thing, async function handler, and we'll do a request. This is a request object. And same thing, we're going to return a new response. Hopefully by now, this is like much quicker for you to kind of type these out. You're like, oh yes, of course I need to send back the response and a 404. If not, you'll get there with more practice, but that's kind of the purpose of these exercises. And eventually the project is to kind of get a better handle on this stuff. So hopefully that's slowly becoming a bit more muscle memory. So there you go, Deno serve the handler. So that's all fine. Now, for this one, before I start the server, I know that I'm going to need the URL, and I know that I'm going to be using a URL pattern. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to say const URL is equal to a new URL of the request.url, so I can actually parse out that information into a URL object. I'm going to say const, I'll just say replace user route is equal to a new URL pattern. Again, you don't have to use the same naming as me. I'll just try to be very explicit here. I always choose password. This path name is going to be /user/ and then a dynamic ID over here, :ID with the URL pattern API. So if the replace user is we're testing it against our URL. So if we're actually doing a request to /user/ID and the request.method is equal to, in this case, put, that means we want to replace a user. Okay. So otherwise, we're just going to be returning a 404. So that's all quite nice. Now, what do we want to do? Well, we need to read the file. We need to write back to the file, and we have to do kind of all the parsing in between. So let me just kind of start up this server, and then we can kind of deal with all that. So I'll run Deno run --watch --allow-net, which we saw earlier. Then the read and write privileges. So --allow-read --allow-write. And then the name of the file. So ex1 in this case .ts, and then we have our process going there for our localhost 8000. Perfect. So I'll just hide that again for a second. Now we are going to be replacing a user. So let's see what that looks like before we write more code here, just so it makes more sense. Let's say I want to replace, I don't know, like let's say Lucretia here. We want to replace Lucretia, who's ID number 3. And we want to say maybe a different name and a different email, right? So remember, a put request is an entire user replacement. We do have to include all of the fields because we're effectively totally taking out that user, replacing that user, but the ID is going to remain the same. So maybe a new name and a new email for this user ID of 3. So let's go ahead and kind of see what that looks like in Insomnia. So if I change this to a put request, and the body now is going to be, this is going to be a name, and I'm going to say, I don't know, what would be the name? Let's just say Max, and then there's going to be an email, and the email might be max@max.com. I don't know. I don't know. My mind couldn't think of anything different there for some reason, but I'll just go with ID here. This is the key difference. We have to know which user it is that we're replacing. Because if you think about it, if I don't have this ID, if there was no ID here and we just had name and email, what is the server supposed to do with that information, right? Like how that would only really make sense as a post request because we want to create that new user because we don't have an ID yet. But a put request is not a post request. A put request means I want to replace an existing resource. So I need to know which the existing resource is because there could be multiple maxes and multiple maxes with even this email maybe. Who knows? It could be, right? Because we can't really tell what our data looks like necessarily. So we need to know the ID specifically. So I'm going to be replacing Lucretia here. ID number 3 is the one I want to replace. So that's really the only unique identifier that we have to tell the server which user we're referring to. So if I switch back to Insomnia, I'm going to change this to ID number 3. And this is the core identifier here. This is the information that we want to change for that resource. Perfect. So now if I send that off, we should get back a 404 right now, which is what we expect because we don't have anything in our ex1 file. So it's just coming straight to here. So let's write the code for this. So we have the body. So let's go ahead and grab that. So I'll say const, maybe, I don't know, user body is equal to request.json. And I do need to await this. So I'll await that. So that is now an actual JSON object that we can grab stuff out of. So we can grab the ID out of it. So I'll say const user ID is equal to user body at the ID field. Because remember, this is just a regular JavaScript object. JSON is going to give us back a JavaScript object so that we can actually look into it and actually find out what that what specific properties are. So in this case, we know it has an ID, a name, and an email. So I'm going to be asking for the ID specifically. So just to make sure this actually works, let's just console log both the body and then the user ID, just so that we can actually confirm that we are getting the information that we expect to get. So we expect to see all the JSON object here, and then just the ID in this case, which should be the number 3. So if I switch to Insomnia and I send that off, and I switch back to VS Code, I do not get anything in this case because I'm still not going to the correct route. So I have to change this to /user, and then I want to change user number 3 in this case. So I actually realized as I was doing this that I don't know if I mentioned this in the previous video, but you probably might have noticed that there is kind of a bit of data duplication here in the actual URL. So we actually have in the JSON body the ID of 3, as well as in the actual request URL, we have the ID of the user that we're changing. So this is kind of comes back down to the API design kind of field. Usually, what you would do is you'd be able to grab this ID directly out of the request URL because you're targeting a specific ID, very similar to getting a specific user with a GET request. So technically speaking, there is a bit of data redundancy here between the ID field that we have in the JSON body, as well as the ID in the actual parameter for the URL. So is it necessary to have it in both? It's really up to how you design your API. I've seen kind of different APIs that do it a different way depending on how it's actually being built by the developers and how they document it. Now, usually, I believe the REST standard does require it to actually be in here at the very least, because that does kind of make the most sense if you think about it intuitively. I should be able to get a user like this, as well as put and patch to this user, because this signifies a lot of information towards what my intent of my request is. Then the body is just the extra information that I actually need. So if you think about it, basically, we don't really need this ID here if our URL is structured like this, because this is saying I want to change user number 3 with this information. However, I'm just going to add that for just data redundancy purposes, and just so I don't have to kind of go through the URL to get that information as well. I can kind of just grab this directly from the body. We have seen in the routing videos how we can use things like the URL pattern API or whichever routing API you're using to grab that unique identifier as well directly out of this URL. We can, for example, turn it into the number 3, but for just sake of ease here, I'm going to just leave it in the body just so you can see kind of done both ways. So with that out of the way, let's just continue with what we have here. So we have our put request, and we're going to user 3. So if I send that off, let's go back to our terminal here. We have, this is our object. So our body here. So we have an ID of 3, Max, name is Max, email is max@max.com. But then the 3 here is just the ID that we're actually pulling out, which is on line number 8 on my screen, which is inside the user body. Go and grab the field of ID because this is a regular JavaScript object. Perfect. So there we have it. We have all the information that we need. We have the ID that we're going to be hunting for in our file. We have the information that we need inside of our object here. Now we can actually go ahead and change that inside of our database, which is our users.json file. So I'm going to say for let I equal 0, I is less than, and I need to grab the user. So let me just close this terminal just so we can actually see what this looks like. So I'm going to say const users is equal to json.parse of await Deno dot read text file of users.json. So I'm going to do this all in one line just so that we can kind of see how that works, because in the video we saw both ways of doing this on 2 separate lines with parse and then reading the text file. I'll just put this in one line since we're that's all we're really doing with it. We're not actually using the intermediary string value. I do directly want this as a JSON object. So in this case, users is going to be that list, this list right here of objects, where there's 5 objects in this particular case. So I have 5 user objects inside of my users variable name. So I can say while I is less than users.length and then I plus plus. So I'm going to be looping through that, and I'm going to say if the users at I, that particular user that I'm looking at right now, if the .id field is equal to the user ID that we just pulled out, so we're going to be looking through this one. It's 1, then 2, then 3, all the way through 5 in this case. If we do find the one we're looking for, in this case number 3, then we want to replace it. So we're going to say replace it basically with this user right here, this user object in the user body that's coming from the actual client. So I'm going to say users at I is equal to the user body. Okay, and that's going to now permanently replace that spot with that value. And what we're going to do is write that back to the file, because this is only changing it in memory. So I'm going to say await deno.write text file, and we're going to write back users to that file, but we need to JSON stringify this. So I'll say JSON.stringify of our users. And let's see, what's the issue here? Oh yeah, we need to specify the name of the file. Thank you, Deno. This is going to be users.json, and we're going to JSON stringify that. So I'm doing this all in one line here, just so you can really see how you can get a bit quicker at writing kind of more concise code. As you get more practice with this, you can definitely split this up into more lines. But once you kind of get a feel for it, you can probably eventually start reading a line like this and be more familiar with what it's doing. You can say, okay, I'm awaiting this thing, which must be a promise. So it's going to take some time. So I'm going to pause here. It's going to write a file. Which file am I writing to? Users.json. What do I need to write there? Well, probably a string, because it's a text file. In this case, I'm stringifying the contents of users. Well, what's users? That's all of these users that we grabbed earlier from the text file, with one user being changed. When that's been changed, then we can return a new response with the user that was changed, which in this case is basically it's that user body that we actually passed in. But if we want to be really specific, we can say JSON stringify of users at I, for example, and then we can pass in the status of 200. Ooh, my goodness. Status JSON stringify. Oh, I was in the JSON stringify section there. That's not where I want it to be. Status of 200. Great. So what we're saying here is return back that new user that was changed as a 200 status. Now, technically, that's the same as a user that was passed in, which is the user body, which is why it's kind of also nice to have that in the body. You can return it kind of directly there instead of having to construct that user. But really, there's multiple methods to do this. I'm going to just do it using that specific value that we inserted. You could have really done it either way, because these are equivalent as of line 13. Perfect. So that's actually going to send off that response only if we hit this case here, which is when we're looping through it and we actually find that user ID. So let's test out if this works. So if I get rid of this console log for now, and then I'll go to my users JSON file. So I'm expecting to change Lucretia here to Max. Okay, so and the name is going to change to Max, and the email is going to change to max at max.com, but the ID is going to remain the same. Fingers crossed. I click a send. I get a 200 OK. I get my ID of 3 max, and then max at max.com. And if I switch back to my file here, users.json, a little bit of reformatting here, but you can see that the name has indeed been changed to Max, but it's in that same spot with the same ID that it had before. So that was just kind of replaced with some new data inside of it, which is pretty nice. So there you have it. That's pretty much exactly how you would kind of complete this exercise with a put request. And the key here is just really kind of this area right here, or I guess you could say probably this area right here. We're looking for that user, but really this part here where we're replacing it completely with that new user information on line 12, and then we're committing it back to our file once we found the user with the ID that matches. Perfect. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's take a look at exercise 2. Okay. Now for this exercise, it's really very, very similar to exercise 1, with data validation being added to it. Okay, so I'm actually going to copy and paste. I really don't like doing this, but in the interest of time, I do want to copy and paste it so I just make less errors and it's not as boring to watch because you already have the code if you did exercise 1. If not, I'll just do a quick rundown of how that works. Let me go through this exercise. So create a Deno project. We're going to be using the same file, users.json, which has a bunch of users in it. With that value now changed. So if you didn't do exercise 1, I did change one user in there. It doesn't really matter as long as you use that user's JSON file. I want you to create a route for user with a dynamic ID, so /user/ID using the URL pattern API. We're going to be listening for put requests again, not patch yet, just regular put requests, so a replacement for a resource. I'd like you to use Insomnia to create a put request with a JSON body for a new user with an existing ID. So I used ID 3, for example, previously. You can use any ID you want as long as it's in the file and an existing user. And we're going to be updating the name and the email field. Now, in Deno, on the server side, we want to add validation to the incoming request body to make the email field required, as well as another check to make sure that it contains the @ symbol inside of it. So this is like not really checking that it's an email, which we'd probably use a regex, regular expression for, or some library for. But we here are just going to do kind of a simple email check to make sure it has an @ symbol inside of it. So if it doesn't, depending on which one of these cases it fails, we want to send back an error object back with probably a 400 status that says, for example, if it's not there, email field is required with the error property. Otherwise, email field needs to be a valid email if it's not an @ sign in there. Now, if it passes all those cases, then we want to accept it very similar to exercise 1. Save that user and replace that user inside the file of the existing user with that new information, and then respond with that replace user's information, just like we did as well. And then you can test this in Insomnia and check that user's JSON file, check the actual errors, make sure you're actually getting them correctly to make sure you're getting both of these types of errors back, where you don't provide an email for one of them, or you do provide an email, but it's not a correct format. So there's no @ sign in it. And see if you get back those correct. It should not save those to the actual file. It should send back an error message with a 400 status code. So give that a shot, and then we'll go through it together. All right, so I'll create a new file here. I'll do ex2.ts. I'll do the same thing. I'll do async function. Actually, you know what I'll do? I think I mentioned this already. I'm actually going to copy everything from exercise 1. I'll just do a quick rundown of how this works. Again, I'm not really a fan of copying and pasting code, but I'll just quickly go through this. So we have our handler. We're parsing out the URL. We have a path to grab the /user/ID using URL pattern. We're testing that we're matching that route with a put method. We're grabbing the body, turning it to JSON, finding the ID to match for the user that we're replacing, grabbing the file users.json, turning it into JSON, searching through that file until we find the user with the matching ID here. If we find it, we do replace it right here by actually committing it back to the file, as well as sending it back to our front end with a 200 status code. Now, the main thing that's missing here is kind of step 5 here, where we're not doing any validation. We're just saving it directly, where we should really be checking that it has the fields that are required. Because technically, if you think about it, I could have saved some information here and added information in the body, or put in invalid information in the body, added new fields, deleted fields, and it would have all just saved as long as there's a matching ID, which is not generally what we want. We have to be a bit more careful. So let's do it with kind of just one field to start, and you can imagine how this would work to check the entire object eventually and do a bit more robust validation. So we want to make sure that there's an email field first, and then so that it's there at all. And then we also want to make sure to validate that it's an email, quote unquote, with an @ sign in it. So how do we go about doing that? Well, once we found I guess there's kind of a few places we can do this. You could probably do this where at the very last minute right here before you commit to the file. But really, if you think about it, the validation kind of makes the most sense to do right at the beginning, because we actually have everything that we need right here on line 7 to figure out whether this validation is actually, it's worth even going past this point here to any of these lines after, right? Because if the body doesn't have that email field, we can respond saying, please send the email field. This is not a valid user. Or if it does have the field and it's not a valid email, we can also respond. We don't even have to bother going to do any of this stuff because we know it's not a valid email. So we should prompt the client. Maybe they made a mistake typing it in. So let's do that right here. I'm going to move this down a little bit. I'm going to say, let's do data validation right over here, right after we grab the user body. So let's test to see for an email exists. So I'll say email required. So we'll say if the object dot has own, so I'm going to check the user body if it has a property in it that I'm looking for. And the property that I'm looking for is going to be email. Okay, we're going to check to make sure it has an email property inside of this user body object. And if it does, then that's great. If it doesn't, then we want to return a 400. So I'm going to say if it doesn't, so a not here at the start, if there's no such thing as an email property in this user body for the client being passed to us, then we know that there's no email in that object. So we can return a new response, and we can put in here probably a JSON.string. I'll make the error on a separate field here. I'll say const error, just so you can see that, is equal to JSON, or I'll just say, how should I do this? I'll do error like this, and then I'll say email field is required. Now, technically what we should probably be doing is putting this like in quotes or something, but I'll just kind of go with this for now. I'll just say JSON.stringify of the error is what we want to send back. We want to send it back as a 400 status because that means that there is a client-side data submission kind of error, so that they know that they should kind of look into the body probably for a hint as to what the error might be. In this case, that the email field is required. Okay, now that's good for that. The next one we want to do is actually, let's just test that works first before we actually go further with this. So I'm gonna cancel my terminal here. I'm going to run Deno run --watch --allow -net --allow -read --allow -write of ex2.ts. There we go. We have it on port 8000. So we are going to be making a request to let's change user number, number 2 this time. And I'm going to say, I'm going to change this to 2. That's the only danger between, we want to make sure that these are the same if we're using this kind of slightly jankier version of having the body also have the ID in here. I'm going to change, let's just say I'm going to change the name to monkey. The email is going to be monkey@forest.com. Okay, or I'll go .ca. Why not? Something a little bit different. Now, I'm going to make a put request, and I expect if I don't have an email in here, that is going to give me back a 400. So I'm going to actually get rid of this here. I'm going to send that off, and I do indeed get back a 400 bad request. Email field is required. And most importantly, if I go to my user's JSON file, monkey has not been changed here for user number 4. I guess that was base. So that is working as we expect. So let me turn off my terminal here. Let's do the next one here, which is email should be valid. So that means that this like has a @ in it. Now, how are we going to go about this? Well, this is not a really great email test, as I mentioned. We're just going to see if it includes the @ in it. If it does, we're just going to assume it's okay. So we're going to say if the user body we'll say email dot includes. So remember, includes is a string method. Let me just go to Chrome really quick, and I'll say string includes JavaScript. You can see string.prototype.includes. If I kind of zoom in a whole bunch here, you can say if we have some string, we can say string.includes, and then we're going to search the thing that we're searching for. So in this case, we're searching for the @. So if it includes the @, then we're okay. If it doesn't include the @ sign, that's what we want to be looking for, the inverse in this case, just like the not having an email. If it doesn't have the @ sign, if it doesn't include the @ sign, then this is not good. I'm just going to kind of copy and paste this here so you don't watch me type too much. The same thing here, the error email field. What did I say I want here? Email field needs to be a valid email. I'll just copy that because better things to do than watch me type too much. Email field needs to be a valid email. I don't know why I capitalized that. I'll just go with that. And it's going to be the same type of 400 error. In this case, the only difference really between these two here is that this is checking for a slightly different thing than this. Now, as I mentioned in the previous video, for validation, we generally want to do all the validation. We don't kind of want to do them one at a time or piecemeal like this. It can get kind of annoying for the client to just get back a response being like, oh, I have missing email, and then send something else, and I have a missing age, and then something else. Now I have ages, in a float or something. You kind of want all the errors to be in an array, so you can have the client know all the validation steps all at once. But for now, we'll just kind of go with this because it's a bit easier to actually code up. Perfect. So that should be good. We early return here. We'll never actually save it. So both of these are the guard conditions for our two validation steps. Let's test that out in Insomnia here. So if I kind of go back to what I had before, monkey at forest.ca, let's imagine I change this to monkey, and I'll do plus forest.ca, for example. So there's no @ sign in here. I should get back a 400 bad request, but with a different error message this time. So I'll send that off. And indeed that works. Email field needs to be a valid email. Perfect. Now, the moment of truth here, if I do an @ sign, before I do this, I'll make sure that this actually didn't get saved just so we can prove it. So there's no monkey in here in our users.json file. If I do everything correct here, this is exactly what we had before. It should pass both of those validation cases. And I'm going to be replacing user number 2 with monkey at forest.ca. And if I go back to my VS Code here, save. I forgot what was number 2. I thought I was changing number 4. But whatever was number 2 did get changed now to a new name and a new email for that user ID of 2. Okay. Now, again, I do want to point out just one more time, we could have gotten this user ID both from this URL or from the body. There are the most important thing is that it's really in the URL because that's the most semantic meaning, and that's usually, I think, what the REST API spec actually requires. It's just, in this case, it's just a little bit easier if we duplicate that information here for various reasons, but there's some kind of pros and cons to both these approaches. A lot of the time, you won't need the ID in the body. You can just grab that kind of implicitly from the fact that we have that already in the URL, but the other information does need to be there. Perfect. So there we have it. That is how we actually do some data validation. This is a really important thing to kind of know. A lot of the libraries like Express and a lot of the other ones, Express by itself, I'm not actually sure. I feel like it's always third-party plugins that you use and middleware and all that kind of stuff that you do data validation with that you add to your routes. This is really all they do. Is they're checking for things like this. There's more things like checking for data types, checking with regex, all that kind of fun stuff. So there is some kind of annoying things that you probably would not really want to manually do, like an email, for example, is not a trivial thing to check for unless you have a really nice regex expression. But generally speaking, this is all that's really happening. Now, this is pretty clunky if you think about it, because this is all within our route. This is very messy. We would want to have our data validation basically be a single function, which we could pass maybe the body, for example, and then that would just do the thing that it needs to do. And then we would pass through that to the rest of the logic that we have in here if we need to actually do stuff with that. We wouldn't have, imagine if we have like 10 different fields we could change. We wouldn't want to have like 100 lines of code for data validation within our route. We probably want to put that into a separate validation file and set a function somewhere. Perfect. Cool. So there you have it. That's validation. Let's take a look at exercise 3 together. Now, for exercise 3, we're going to be looking at patch requests. Okay, so pretty much everything is going to be the same. The main difference is that this is a patch request, which is kind of that differential type of request where we're not sending the entire object to be replaced. We're just sending the fields that we want changed, or kind of the difference that we want in that object. Now, I'll just go through this quickly so it makes sense. We have the users.json file that we've been using so far, so you can grab that. We're using the same route here with the user/ID with a dynamic ID. Make a URL pattern for that. Listen for patch requests this time, not put requests. Use Insomnia to send a patch request, and you can either put an ID in there, or you can practice getting it from the URL. But most importantly, I'd like you to test having either the name or the email property in there, but not both. You can put both eventually, but make sure it works with just one or just the other. Okay. Unlike a put where we had to have both in there because we're doing a complete replacement. Now, accept this request on Deno side. Send back a 200 once it's been replaced correctly with the entire new user object that's been changed. And again, as I mentioned, test it with both just the email and ID or just the name and ID. Make sure that those work separately with each other and you're not like you still have the if you're doing just ID and name, for example, the email shouldn't be changed. If you're just doing ID and email, then the name shouldn't be changed. Okay. As a bonus, if you'd like to go for it, try to add the same data validation that we added in exercise 2 for our put request, but to this patch route, just for a little bit more practice if you like. So give that a shot and then we will go through it together. Okay, so I'll create an exercise 3 here. So exercise 3.ts. We'll do the same thing, async function handler. This is a request of type request. And we're going to return a new response, and that response is going to be of type null and a status of 404. And we're going to say deno.serve of our handler. And here we're going to be listening for our patch requests at that same route. So I'll say const URL is equal to a new URL of our request.url. And I'll say const, I'll say update user route is equal to a new URL pattern with a path name of /user /ID, but that ID is dynamic. So :ID there. And then if the update user route matches, so testing against our URL that we're getting from our client, and the requests method is equal to patch this time instead of put, then we want to update the given user. And we can do all of our kind of file read write in here, as well as our kind of differential that we need for that user object. So let me kind of grab my terminal over here. I'm going to just press the up arrow key so I don't have to retype all this. This is ex3.ts here instead of ex2.ts. So Deno run --watch --allow net --allow -read --allow -write ex3.ts. Same deal as our other exercises, port 8000 localhost. So over here, I'm going to grab the, frankly, most of this code is going to be the same. As we saw in the previous video, I could probably copy and paste most of this code right here. Okay, I'll just type it out one more time just so we can actually see how that works, but that's mostly going to be the same code. So I'll say const user body is equal to, await request.json. Okay, so we're grabbing the body, we're going to parse it into JSON, and I'll say const user ID is equal to user body at the ID property. So we'll grab the ID, we'll say for let I is equal to 0, I is less than, we need all the users. I always do this, say const users is equal to JSON.parse of await Deno read text file. And we want to read the users.json file there. So we'll turn that into the users object. If it's less than users.length, then we're going to loop through this and we're going to go I++. I is usually short for index. Just a habit, I guess, from computer science, too much random computer science code from way back in the day. And now we're going to be looping through here. We're going to say if the users at that index, so starting at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I guess technically this doesn't make sense. I'm actually off by 1. I just kind of realized that. yeah, we are actually off by 1. I should probably correct that because I'm so used to starting at 0 in this case that I just kind of habitually do it. But if you look at our users file, we actually start at 1. We don't start at 0. So it's a bit of an kind of a goof on my part. And we're looping up till 4. We're not looping up till 5. So we would actually never really hit this last Deno over here. But that's kind of no good. So we do less than or equal to users.length. So if users at that index is equal to, actually, you know what? I'm getting confused here. So you can actually see that I'm actually wrong about that. This was correct. It is less than or equal to. See, this is what happens when you get too much caught in your head with what's happening. This index is allowing us to loop through these values starting at index 0. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 for this array. But within those indices are objects, and each of those objects has a respective ID, and that ID can be really whatever we want. So you can see that would be a bug that I'd always kind of had to fix when I'm testing with things by accidentally getting off by 1 or checking for the wrong ID. I do that all the time. It definitely happens to everyone. So we want to check at that ID. So again, I was wrong about the less than or equal to. It's just less than here because we're going from index 0 of the array to index, in this case, 4. So we're doing index 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. But then the ID is a property of the value at that index. And in this case, we're checking to see if that ID property is equal to the user ID, right? So if those are equal to each other, then what we can do is we can update that user information. Okay, so in this case, we're going to update the user. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to say const updated user is equal to, and I'll create an object here, and I'm going to use kind of some trickery with object manipulation with spreading to make sure that this is easier to do. So I'm going to spread out all the values of the previous user in there, and I'm going to put all the values of the new user in there. So I actually got this backwards. I'm going to put in all the values of the previous user, which is the users at I. And I'm going to add in at the end and overwrite any values that are inside the new user body that's been added by the client. Okay, so whatever's in there right now is right here. So I'm going to kind of basically create a clone of the object, but I'm going to be spreading out and overriding the fields and values for anything that's coming from the actual client property. This is different from a put because I can now change only selective information, selective fields and values in that specific resource instead of replacing the entire resource. So if I only change the name here, the email is still coming from here, and vice versa. If I only change the email here, then the name is still coming from here. So that's totally okay. Okay, I should probably be checking for some other things here, as I've always mentioned, but I'll just leave it at that for now. Now, once we have that, what we can do is we can actually put that back into that users object. So I'll say users at I is equal to this updated user object, just updated user, just like that. Too many similar sounding things here. This is my update user route, updated user. So we're going to replace that inside of our users here. So we can write it back to the file because right now it's still the old value that's in there. We're only making kind of this in memory right here. So we had to actually put that into that field inside of that in memory. And we're going to say await Deno.write text file. And we're going to say write to users.json. And in here, we're going to do JSON.stringify of our entire users array. So this is going to work because we've changed the value at that location with this updated user value And now we can also send this updated user value back to the client in a actual response. So I can say return a new response with JSON.stringify of the updated user and the status. I always put this inside JSON stringify for some reason. Status of 200. Okay, so exact same steps. In fact, I'm going to open up exercise 2, or exercise, I guess, 1 in this case, because there's less code in there, just so we can compare. So exercise 1, notice that that's the same pattern. We're looking for the user with the ID. The main difference is this line right here, line 12. We're replacing it completely with whatever is coming in the body, and we're committing that back to the file and sending it back to the client. In our patch, we are creating the kind of the updated user, the difference between those two. It could be a complete replacement, but it could also not be. That's the main difference. And then we're sending that back to users, and we are writing that to the file and sending that updated user back to the client. Now, I probably could get rid of this intermediate value here and just do kind of users at I again here, like I did, just so you can see 2 different versions of that. Sometimes my brain does different things, and I probably clean that up after. But that's 2 different kind of ways to kind of go about creating these user objects, so you can actually have this variable here or not. Perfect. So let's test this out. I'm going to test it both with having with having one of each. So if I switch back to Insomnia here, I'm going to get rid of my email here. I'm going to switch to let's just say ID of 4 this time, and name. Let's just say we'll say the name is Kitty. And we expect that to work, okay, if this is a patch request. So I can switch this to a patch request. This would not work for a put request if we did the validation correctly, because a put request should be a complete replacement. And we're missing information here, in this case, the email, which if it's required would be very bad to be missing. So what I expect here is for ID number 4, if I go back to my file here, base is going to get changed. The name is going to get changed from base to Kitty. ID 4 is going to remain the same, and the email is going to remain the same. Okay, the only thing that's going to change is the name of base to Kitty. So let's go to Insomnia, and I'll send this off. I do get back at 200. Okay, look at that. We get back our ID of 4, the correct information there. If I go back to my VS Code to look at that file, indeed, that is exactly what happened to a user with ID of number 4. Let's do the same, but for maybe user ID of 5. This time I'll change the email, but leave the name the same. So Deno will have a different email here. So if I do, I'll do email here, sorry, email, there we go. We'll say cat@meow.com. And if I send that off for Deno, in this case is ID 5 actually, so I should be careful to change number 5 here. So if I change this, I expect the email for Deno to change, but the name to remain the same. If I send that one off, indeed, that is exactly what happens. If I go back to VS Code and I save that, that is indeed what happens. So that's the main difference between a patch and a put request. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so that's the main thing to keep in mind as the differences between things like post, put, and patch. Now there was a bit of a bonus here. I'll let you kind of go down that route yourself to get some more practice. It's going to be very similar to exactly what we saw in exercise 2. Practice even adding more data validation, frankly, because it's a really important thing to get skilled with. Because you can try different things that are a bit more complex, like how regex might work, for example, to make it a bit more robust if you want to get fancy with things like email. Okay, so that is exercise 3. Hopefully that one makes sense. I do have a bonus in here. I want to go through it really quick. It's a little bit more open-ended, and I'm going to be leaving it up to you to try out. So I'm just going to show you what I mean. To get more practice, we saw that there's a different type of body encoding that you can send in a request. Specifically, there's this thing called a multipart form. This is very important for different types of data, and it's probably the most prominent form of sending data literally in form elements inside, for example, HTML in a website, but even in different apps, for example, like iOS or Android apps, you can definitely send things as forms like this as well. And that's how a lot of frameworks as well as some of the tools are built. Now, I'd like you to get more practice with this by completing exercises 1 to 3 that we just did together, but instead of having a JSON body, use multipart form. That means that change this from JSON to multipart form and see if you can kind of get all of the stuff still working with some small changes to the actual code. So ask yourself, what are you going to need to change for this? And what does this allow you to do that regular old, our friend JSON cannot do? Okay, so I'll let you try that out. And if you're struggling with that, let me know in the comments. But yeah, that was pretty much all the exercises that I have for you. I hope that you found this set of exercises valuable and interesting. If you did, I'd love it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel. I also have, if you want to support the channel, YouTube membership set up, as well as a Patreon page that you can go to, and super thanks. So check those out if you're able to. I think that this set of exercises really was very important to go through in the context of also things like a post request. So if you haven't done those, I encourage you to kind of get familiar with that. Because what we're going to be doing in the next video is going through the last major type of the CRUD operations, which is the delete operation, which is the D in CRUD, which is actually probably one of the easiest ones when it comes to actually the kind of logic that we need to handle and kind of what's going on. So I can't wait to get to that video. Make sure that you actually go through all the other content first, just so it makes the most sense. When we arrive at the delete, it makes kind of sense what's actually happening, what was created, what it is that we're deleting, was it updated, and once we're done with delete, we're pretty much done with all the CRUD operations and we can move on to some other topics. I can't wait to get to that video. I will see you there.